Do you know how your head, heart, and hands can make you a more successful leader? Human-centered leadership is gaining traction, and its foundation is supported by a service-oriented workplace culture powered by empathy and responsiveness. My guest today, Lynnette Phillips, is an executive coach and leadership development professional who helps leaders cultivate relational mastery, do the extraordinary, and transform their leadership strategies with a human-centered approach. You will learn how the three H's can transform the way you lead and drive results. This is E3. Engage and empower with empathy. Hi, Lynnette. Welcome to the episode today. It's so nice to have you here. I know you and I were in a webinar session a few weeks ago with a bunch of human resources professionals. I know that's how we connected. Your presentation really resonated, and so I brought you onto this podcast today and thought it would be good to kind of dig into what you shared with the HR group. And I think there's a lot of good stuff that we could talk about today. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me and for attending, with the HR group as well and having some wonderful discussion there in that space.
It's an important topic, and it's nice to see HR groups talking about things like this. As someone who's not in the human resources field, I find it incredibly inspiring. The fact that they're bringing people like you in to really support these concepts and then bring them back to their leaders is very encouraging. You were talking a lot about a service-oriented culture during that talk a few weeks ago. What does it mean to be service-oriented, and why is it so important when an organization aspires to create a workplace culture centered around empathy and responsiveness? Because when I always think service-oriented, I come from a marketing background, so I'm thinking customer service, right? But you're kind of focusing inward, right, to the employees, and how can we be more service centered to the employees?
Yes, I think we always think about service kind of outward, right? I'm going to come up, I'm going to experience maybe a product or a service, and it's going to, what's on the receiving end. And I simply, define it as fostering service excellence is where organizations are really embracing and really kind of creating an environment where their values, their beliefs, and the behaviors, right? The simple question of how does leadership, exist? How does it make an impact within our organization? And it does it in concert, is a word that I think of where it really is tied into the employee experience. It's very much tied into role satisfaction. I think about the simple question, would you recommend not just to this employer, to a friend, would you recommend it to your children? Would you recommend it to, your closest friend from that perspective, a best friend? Would you recommend it to your family? And when you do that, I think that in concert with that, you now have businesses that want to think about business success, but building a culture where, employee satisfaction is also just as much as prioritized. I talk about it that it's really, really important because they're not two mutually exclusive concepts. It's not like two different, things that are working parallel. They're working together the entire time. Your employees become this heartbeat, of your organization, but your business, you put out there into the world to service, your customers and even more customers if they can find you and they can connect with you and you can really, really deliver. So I really think that it's, it has to be fostered. And then the empathy comes along with it. It helps with decision making. It helps with interactions. It helps with our culture. And then the responsiveness piece becomes we begin to work on the things that are really, really important. We can prioritize. We can be adaptable. I love that you talked about that word kind of around this topic as well, even kind of when we were talking about it a little bit before. And it gives us an opportunity, as leaders or facilitators of change to take action, to really, listen to people on all sides and different viewpoints and really bring together some good skills and mastery of skills and make a difference.
I always thought that if you don't have a service-oriented approach internally with your employees, that's eventually going to translate externally with your customers. Because if you don't have an inspired workforce, the way they support customers is somehow going to change. Have you ever seen that with a company or one of the clients that you've worked with where you've literally seen that deterioration in customer service because the service-oriented approach internally had failed?
Absolutely. I think it's often easily described as when things are now transactional and they're not
Mm,
interactional. We're not reading some of the other cues in that process of what you're talking about, right? When we lose some of that, you lose proactive behaviors. Someone asked me for
mm,
this, I gave it to them.
yeah.
Right? Some of the relational components. Are we reading body language? Are we taking a moment and, being really attentive and being clear in communication? You know, are we extending further? Are we being curious even? We talk about curiosity, as a key in innovation. And so when that is sacrificed, I think in a culture, and that's a word I'll use in response to your question, you end up kind of just existing and being. And it's okay, like you said, but it really lends itself to being very, very transactional. It can be transactional manager and employee. I'm getting what I need, you're getting what you need, nah, nothing more, nothing less. But it also can be, outwardly. There is less innovation, there is less creativity. We're going to do status quo. We're going to live and exist in that bubble for a little while, and then you need to be reinvigorated, right?
And customers can feel that when it's a status quo organization. They can certainly feel that in the way service is being delivered. So tell me a little bit more about this head, heart, hands concept that you introduced in your webinar a few weeks ago, because I think that really is the answer to going from a transactional organization to something that's more meaningful.
Yeah, I can't take full credit to say that, oh, because I've actually heard the three words, put together in various different presentations. I'm pretty sure others can resonate and say, I've had, heard a take of head, heart, and hands. As I integrated or think about it in this approach is taking it from human-centered design, right? When the individuals, the end users at the core, in this case, we talk about it as employees. And so it really is a framework around those very, very familiar words that we talk about it, but just adapted to thinking about it from an organizational culture and design perspective, the same way you would some of our own technology or a restaurant experience even, right, is the human centered, and it's really adapting and building strategies around that. So just to break it down, obviously the head, as we think about it, right, it's everything from how you think strategically, how you're answering or solutioning some of your biggest challenges or problems within your organization. Are you taking risks? Right? Are you helping, that amygdala not get so red flag up, right? You're able to, use that EQ at times. And we're a very data driven society. We want to tell a story. And so even through the research and the kind of the analytical thinking, what's the story that we're telling ourselves? And from there, what do we want to then put forth these resources, the energy, the excitement? So the head really is that part of it, right? That part of the business component. The heart, that is the empathy, the understanding, the old school term of soft skills. I've been in the workplace over 2 decades now. So I've been around that terminology in leadership a lot of times. And it is things like deep listening, active listening, leaders who are able to coach, teach, model. We're always picking up behaviors and learning and relearning. And leaders who are at the core committed to some human centered leadership, very much saying, yes, AI has come into the workplace, but the people are not robots. I love that you mentioned that earlier when we were chatting.
Yes.
So that heart, becomes, how do I take the strategy and the direction that we're going? We've got, these leaders who are fueling it as well. And then the hands are really bringing forth the right skills, the mastery, and the ability to execute and implement. I think we can all have great ideas and we've done it, but do you take that insight and turn it into tangible action where we start rewarding behaviors or seeing the outcomes that we plan? And I've worked in an organization that's pretty exciting, right? When you go from a concept to, oh my gosh, I can't believe we've gotten to this place. And it's really by the means of the relationships that we built, the collaboration, the understanding, the communication, a lot of things came together for us to be able to achieve the results that we're looking to do. So that's head, heart, and hands all coming together. It's more of a total system, not siloed aspects of running the business, but working together as a total system.
I like how you've framed it that way, because I think a lot of people think, okay, we have the tactical execution part of what we're doing in business, and then, oh, there's this emotional intelligence thing that we have to somehow deal with. I mean, it's all so interconnected. And I like that this concept really treats it that way as a holistic framework.
Yeah, I know radical candor is very, much a widely sought out concept to say, how do we get there, right? But I always know that that word care is always attached to that when I talk with individuals of like, I want to be able to work with members of my team, with radical candor, where I can speak up and I can say things, but it's done with care. And so that at the glue, a lot of it is that heart piece. Individuals want to find their style of it as well, right? We all offer different things. Like some of us, I think we're just born with an empathetic bone. It's somewhere like in our between our elbow and our, pinky, who knows, where it exists, but others it's fostered by other things, and then others discover, how do I show up with empathy? How has my life experiences helped shape me? And that's why I think in my role as a coach, helping others build their confidence around the ways in which they can do those things or learn new skills or apply it in a different way.
Yeah, it makes it seem less challenging, especially if you're someone who doesn't come naturally to empathy. It's like you said, some people are just innately born with this really strong sense of empathy, but others struggle with it. But it's not that they don't want to learn, they just don't even know where to start. So that's where you come in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they got to bet on themselves or see it in themselves. Believe it or not, they're probably much further along than what they would maybe even give themselves credit for with learning it as a new skill or seeing it or applying it in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest hurdle, just self-awareness and really wanting to take that first step and learn and understand how to embrace it further. So I'm sure you have an example of when you've worked with a client where you've actually been able to implement this head, heart, hands concept.
Yeah, we even used it as more of like, let's walk through a case study in our time of the webinar, right? How can I have some practicality, because we were with practitioners, and so we walked into it thinking of a high growth startup. Our case study was built around a couple of different pieces from different things coming together, but really trying to make it relatable. So I'll go through it briefly. In high growth times, you do what you got to do to run the business. You do still have to be intentional about practices. And I'm a big fan of listening tours. I know that there are, surveys out there as well, and different means of gathering and collecting and analyzing and going back to the head perspective. And so I talked about in our case study, what do you do when you're presented with a challenge? Like now the leaders are saying, they're seeing signs of burnout. The cynicism is coming through, just the general mental fatigue, the cloudiness, the creativity is a little staggered. So you got, you're hearing some themes emerging as you have various leaders, talking with their teams and really uncovering where we're at right now, right? You get themes of like burnout coming down, but you're also getting some breakdown in team collaboration, because roles might be shifting, priorities might be changing, they might be doing it very, very quickly, and then we're seeing kind of that tug of war that you talked about a little bit, which can impact externally if something happens, right? The internal service culture isn't necessarily happening. We're doing a great job with it. Clients are very happy externally, but how are we showing up for one another, and why can't we really commit to some of those core values together when we're dealing with each other? And so oftentimes the head aspect is leaders being invited into validating those assumptions, those things. Believe it or not, observation is really, really key.
Hmm.
If you are told individuals are experiencing burnout, what are you also observing or engaging in conversation with, even one-to-one level, or inviting people in to share? And you really hope your organization is open, that others feel like they can share that and bring things like that up. Are you witnessing breakdowns in communication? The simplest one, right, is email swirl, where things are all over the
Hmm.
place, and it's like, okay, somebody provide the direction or what needs to happen, or there's finger pointing or other things. So again, to what degree are we living in some of this experience or validating some of these themes? Or maybe it did even come up in employee surveys where people are giving feedback on some of these things. But really seek out, how do I get a real deep understanding? What does it look like to have strong team collaboration? How will I get it to model it, teach it, grow it, coach it even? At the end of the day, be able to redirect when it's not happening, so we don't get to this point. You got to start with a real deep understanding of what some of your challenges are. I think the biggest exploration, and allow it to be a sandbox. Ask some tough questions. get to the heart of it. You can bring in emotions even. A lot of times, believe it or not, in the head part, they work well together. Then as you usher in, the heart aspect, okay, we've identified a challenge, identified a problem. If you have leaders who are potentially experiencing burnout, it's going to impact their efficacy on their job, believe it or not. We can't
Oh,
stuff that
yeah.
away. It impacts our productivity, just our general excitement. And so, you go back to what are co-creating some of the solutions. If it's an internal thing, maybe they have some things that they, need to think about in some capacity. If it's an organizational level, some shifting priorities keep causing others to deal with chronic stress. What can we then do? What do we need to pause? What do we need to refocus on? And so this is where empathy kind of comes to the forefront. I have a deeper understanding of what our real challenge is. And now we're going to be co-creating some solutions. Ask the people who it affects the most. What would this look like? What are the possibilities? And some things it's okay to say, while I've taken that in and I've heard that feedback, I read this recently, right? That there's a great way to communicate. Well, no, we cannot pursue that. And I think that we talked a little bit about that in the webinar too, right? That's just as important at times. That if you decide not to go down a certain path in leadership to address your workforce, I think it's also okay to say, we've heard you, we've listened, here's the solution that we're, committing to. And others can work through that impact and make decisions based on that. The head invites the co-creating solutions, understanding behaviors that need to be present, how to support leaders often, because they're the ones in the messy middle of a lot of this. When I say leaders, I'm talking about your frontline leaders, 1 and 2 levels directly in your workforce. Seek out learning opportunities, and learning opportunities can look like bringing people together. I think one of the most powerful things with working with organizations is when leaders feel like, oh, I thought I was the only one challenged in this area, or I thought I was the only one experiencing this difficulty. But they're either in a setting where they're learning a new concept together, or they're working through an experience, or they're just having really good dialogue. And I've seen a lot of HR professionals be very, very skilled at facilitating those conversations. But I also get the great pleasure of coming in externally at times and just being a different voice, right? Sometimes that psychological safety with a person that's like, Lynnette doesn't have any skin in the game. She's not here every day. Might invoke openness or a different way of looking at some of these challenges as well. What can leaders do at the forefront between the skills of listening and attentiveness and courage, even, to address these things head on? Can they invite really good conversations to come up with solutions to your problems, right? And then the last piece is hands. If you're going to collect all this data or spend time in these rich discussions, take action. Don't let it fall off to where someone feels, oh my gosh, I opened my mind up. I thought of different ways that we can do this. I thought something would change, and then not do the work behind making improvements or investing in resources, making different decisions. That's really the hands, the real sweat equity work. Now we're going to take what we were thinking, what we were feeling, and let it impact to what we're doing. And I've seen organizations kind of walk through and, learn, man, we were heavily leaning on the empathy piece and the heart was there, but it didn't necessarily impact how we thought about it from a strategic perspective, or how our business priorities needed to connect more with our people. And I've seen vice versa, right? Which is, we were very good with strategic planning, maybe lacked some of the leadership skills that really could anchor others to mobilize their skills. And what does strength-based leadership look like? Moving people into action. So now they're ready to take that risk with us.
As is the case with most organizations these days, I think ever since the pandemic subsided and with the advent of AI, it's almost like the pace of work has accelerated threefold. So companies are just constantly dealing with constant change and transformation. So leaders are trying to keep up with that and then also carry their employees along on that journey. But I feel like some leaders just simply aren't equipped, or they don't have the tools to support teams through major change or constant change. So I think having a toolkit like this, it's a good place to start. You mentioned strategic planning. We're in that time of year where leaders are starting to really look at the following fiscal year and putting plans together. And you said you've seen kind of both sides of the fence, where the strategic planning was really tied up in a bow, but then maybe other elements of the people component were falling apart. Or you have organizations who really got the people piece down, but then they didn't quite know how to incorporate it into their strategic planning process. So what would your advice be? Now we're in that prime time of year as leaders are all looking forward and to the future and the following year. How would you suggest leaders sit down and really infuse what you were just talking about into their strategic planning process?
Yeah, I love this question, by the way. I think let's get to some practicality. I'm going to highlight, where I get the great pleasure of serving 15.5 as a performance coach there, because the words of do less and obsess is included in our goals and priorities section of the work that we do there. But I even would say it as simply as really commit to a few key initiatives and execute with excellence. Like, I think that level of commitment to restraint, to say we have a roadmap, we can do a few things really, really well, or we can do a lot of things and see what happens. And you're bringing along a lot of people with you a lot of times. Whether you're a small organization, you're still bringing everyone with you. You can be under 100, you can be 2,000, you're still bringing everyone with you on that journey. And so, what does that look like? And really clear initiatives. This is the direction that we're going. A lot of organizations have transparency as a company value, right? So they can anchor in it, and it can come back to everything from, communication to our practices on giving feedback. So I do think about being transparent about what is committed. Like, we need to hit this mark. I will say shout out to a lot of the sales organizations, because like, for them, they're like, that's our way of life. Like, it's never a negotiable, right? Even if it's a stretch goal, it's a committed goal, So I always have fun with members of teams like that. But there are times where 90% is still success. I think be clear and communicate, because there is, some work around, if you're familiar with John Doerr's work in OKRs, where having that ambitious stretch goal, they've seen teams exceed it because it was like, there's no way we're going to do that, is the start of the conversation. But then when you figure out, oh, we are doing it, what can we do to amplify the success of that? And so I do think really having in your planning methodology, communication around, is this committed or is this a stretch? And this is us, thinking outside the box. And what does that look like? And still help answer the question, what does success look like? Where are we inviting taking risks? Then others can figure out how they can contribute to that. I think understanding what motivates your teams, this is, obviously for leaders, it's very similar. I am married to an educator, and so there are different ways that students show up. I think that we are the same as humans in the workforce too. So I think understanding the collective motivation when your group is together as a group, but also on an individual level, right? I think it can vary. Leaders being able to mobilize motivation intrinsically, even extrinsically at times, for how to get individuals to apply their skills, their knowledge, their talents to these org priorities, right? In mission-driven cultures, a lot of times in nonprofits, it circles around that mission, right? So people have to see that we're serving the communities that, we've committed to doing. It's pretty easy then to do the hard work. On the other side of that, how does that happen in your day-to-day as well? If that's, not your reality, tap it into motivation. And the last one that I have is really address any skills gaps. Like, we have got to continue to be learners. Like, it's just evident.
Yeah.
On this journey. I think that is what shapes our workplace and our workforce now. We are not in our industrial revolution anymore and cranking out, even the evolution and the technology around cars has changed, where people have to learn, new things. I think about my, previous career before coaching full time and running hotels at Walt Disney World, and it changed over time. I was there as we launched the Magic Band and this new way to experience, Disney parks. I worked at Disney's Grand Floridian, where at one point in time there were still hard keys, like,
Oh my
if you
goodness.
remember that. And so from hard keys to this magnetic key to, what do you mean I'm going to, open a door with my phone? Like, sometimes we can't imagine that. And so to do that, you have to increase your comfort level with troubleshooting technology or different things. And so for the plan that you're putting in place, are we prepared or am I preparing? And I think having questions like that, and there's no wrong answer with either of those, but again, we're now bringing in at the deeper understanding level, what might my workforce need to be able to do the things that we're committing to do together. And so addressing skills gaps is really, really important. And it can be, again, I want to get ahead of it and I want to be preparing people. I want to determine ways in which they can upskill, they can reskill, and we're really empowering others to, own their experience in the workplace and get excited about the work that we're going to be doing together. And so maybe it's org wide. We need some shared language. We all need to be practicing this. Maybe it's, a function within a part of the organization, but that's what I would offer.
Yeah, I love that last point you made, because I do think that's something that tends to get pushed aside when times are. Well, you mentioned the case study and you just gave a few minutes ago about a high growth company. When things are moving really quickly and there's a lot to do, growth and development, learning, filling skills gaps, I think that piece tends to, we can work on that later. The employee growth and development, that's kind of a nice to have when we have time on our hands. So I think people
Yeah,
take that for
time is like
granted. You do.
it
And
is.
even I will say, in my experience as an employee in the past, I was guilty of, because I would section off times in my calendar, like a block in my calendar once a week to dedicate to growth and development. So that could be, taking a LinkedIn learning course, or, maybe scheduling a mentoring session with another colleague, or whatever. It could have been anything. But I would oftentimes, during busy times of year, kind of just delete that off the calendar. I could probably do without that this week. It's fine because I have this project and I have deadlines. So I really think, having a company with a leadership team that's very adamant on skill development and growth for its employees, and incorporating that into the strategic planning. I personally am a huge proponent of that, because I think that's where employee engagement is really going to happen, when when employees know that the leadership team is investing in their growth and their skills development.
Yeah. And then also it can be in flow. I loved your description of like, then there might be that shift in that busy time. Think about a manufacturing company that we have some seasonality, or just different businesses, right? Or you can pick on our sales team organization. We know end of the week's not, end of the month, end of the quarter is not the most ideal, to pull them into some of those experiences. But where do you make space? Where do the pauses come? Because believe it or not, even just the acknowledgement of where we're going and what we're achieving along the way, can be great practices of learning. Are we doing, retros? Are we doing some start, stop, and continues at pivotal moments while we're in progress on things? Because those are also learning activities as well, not just giving the feedback, but really delving in and understanding too a little bit more about adult learners, where gone are the days of 3 days intensives where we come back with all of these great resources and energy and excitement. It's a journey every day, almost like, what can I apply today in maybe some existing learning, or what might I learn today through the course of working with my colleagues, or learning from, a client that I'm working with, that, I can really bring in, and it can continue to contribute to our success. So I think we can take that word learning and even debunk some of the myths around it having to always be singular events or a big splash. It can just be, what's the ongoing integration of it into our culture to engage that whole system.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually makes me think of a book I'm reading right now, where the author talks about how some people just get through the day, but my approach is to take from the day. What you're just saying there is, how can you kind of take bite-sized chunks from your day and treat those as learning experiences, rather than, you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, I just got to get through this day. It's going to be busy. I have a lot of meetings. What can you take from that day that will enrich your life? Even if it's just a 15-minute call with a colleague where you learn something new.
Yeah, it makes me think of your example too, when you're saying, okay, what can I take from the day? Just knowing an energy management, right? If you're hosting a 4 o'clock meeting, kind of check in or understand my audience I might be their fourth or fifth thing today. What might they need to do to check into this space or to give the energy to the concept that we're having, or how can I best prepare? Believe it or not, just evolving in some of those techniques can be going back to the strategy. Hey, we need to lessen our heavy meeting culture, so we got to be really, really effective. Going back to, we need to increase teamwork, collaboration, but we can't do it by having more meetings. We got to do it by having better meetings. Those are some of the things when you really start to get it to the heart of your issues, and they come through learning and applying those learnings and being committed.
I'm going to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, do less and obsess. I mean, that speaks 1,000 words. I think we all get wrapped up in the busy meeting culture. I interviewed someone a few weeks ago who talked about how busyness does not equal productivity. So I think a lot of this busyness is causing some of our stress and burnout in the workplace right now. So being able to stop doing things, to include that in the strategic planning. What are we going to stop doing? How are we going to focus, do less, and obsess? I love it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Lynnette. This has been a really inspiring conversation. I feel like I learned something today, so I know what I'll be taking from my day today as a learning, and it was my session with you. And if anyone wants to reach out to you or engage with you, I know you're fairly active on LinkedIn. Is that the place to find you?
Yes. So Lynnette Phillips, Phillips spelled just like the screwdriver. That's what I always say. So absolutely looking forward to connecting.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
This podcast is designed to help busy business leaders create an inspired and engaged workforce. I am building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you know someone who I should interview or should be a part of this community, please send me a message on LinkedIn or Instagram. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.